let's take a villain from DC and make a parody of him for Marvel. He's a hit. Well, let's make him a good guy. Now let's give him his own comic book. Aw, sure, Fox, he can be in a movie. Oh, you're gonna go against everything that made him popular? But you have the perfect actor. What? You want to try again? Okay, but this time he'll remain true to the character? Could you use the same actor? How about the writers of Zombieland? And rate it R. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Deadpool. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today is Mr. Chad Smith. How are you, Chad?
I'm doing pretty good, Laramy. How about you, buddy?
Oh, I am wonderful. This was a treat to go back and rewatch this movie. It is one of the better in the realm of comic book movies.
Yeah, especially outside of mainline Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'd make a pretty good argument that's maybe the best outside of that realm. But
yeah, it's definitely the best in Fox's attempts to make comic book movies.
What? Yeah, no.
I don't know what they've been doing with the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, but somehow they were able to get it right finally with Deadpool.
Well, and it's kind of interesting just that it even got made. For one, the whole thing about it being an R-rated movie, and clearly Ryan Reynolds didn't want to make it without that. But the fact that he gets to have a second take at the character, so after the abortion that was in Wolverine Origins,
horrible. I'm dreading. I'm like both dreading and excited to one day do that movie on the show.
Well, I don't know about you, but I actually refuse to call that Deadpool. For one, it doesn't actually name the character Deadpool in the movie, but it's not Deadpool at all. He plays Wade Wilson for a minute, and then he plays a weird thing whose mouth is sewn shut and has laser vision and swords in his arms.
Yeah, but don't they call it?
It's not Deadpool.
Don't they call it like Operation Deadpool or Project Deadpool?
Maybe. It's been a long time since I watched that movie for
and
numerous
to ever watch it again. All right,
but I can't call that Deadpool.
Yeah, no. So let's go ahead and get into that. So obviously this was not the first live action Deadpool. Ryan Reynolds did play the character in 2009's, as we just said, X-Men Origins Wolverine, which was so bad. I mean, they took the merc with the mouth and they sewed his mouth shut.
Yeah, and like I said, bizarre powers he's never had in the comics and everything else too. So it was terrible.
Yeah, the blades coming out of his hand. I'm going, okay, well he should have swords, but okay, they're going to do that. And then they gave him the ability to teleport, which I'm going, okay, Deadpool can do that, but it's because of a device that he has.
Right.
But then he shoots the laser beams, and I'm like, yep, can't explain that one.
And like the weird tattoo thing from the injections, the whole thing was just super bizarre. I don't know.
Yeah, and they even, when he blasts the eyes, they made it so that the black marks on his eyes looks kind of like the Deadpool mask. So,
yeah, it was so bad.
It was bad. But the comic book character that this one goes after debuted in the comics back in The New Mutants number 98 back in February of 1991. I do think this movie benefits from the fact that he's not that old of a character, because he was only 25 years old of a character. Not only was he fresher, but you didn't have as much to already have ingrained in society like you did with Batman and Superman, who were pushing 80 or 80 plus at the time of this movie. And even the X-Men that he's from were well over 50, because they came out in 63. 50, yeah. So
no, I would for sure agree with that. I also think it has to do with just the character is a parody of superheroes altogether anyways. So, it's kind of interesting. He also doesn't have a fixed origin story. It's one of those things he actually, in a lot of, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a lot, but in a lot of his fourth wall breaking in the comics, he gives different stories about his origin, almost like the Joker, Heath Ledger's Joker does sometimes, like, that sort of thing. So yeah, both being a relatively new character and a relatively new character who part of his whole shtick is wink, wink, nod, nod. We both know this is fiction and, I can do what I want.
Yeah.
Definitely played well into a movie.
No, I agree. So the movie, before we get too deep into the characters, the movie came out on February 12th, 2016, and of course it was rated R. Now, the February 12th, 2016, this was a Valentine's Day movie. Like, how great is that?
Well, I mean, he tells you that it's a love story at the beginning, so why are you surprised?
They even released posters and trailers that made it look like it was a romantic movie. I remember there was this whole social media thing about guys like texting their girlfriend the romantic poster and going, hey, we should go see this for Valentine's Day.
And he even keys into that, if you remember, pretty close to the beginning of the movie where he's sitting on the bridge before he attacks the convoy and he's drawing in his little notebook and he breaks the fourth wall and starts talking, and he's clearly talking to the female audience, and he even says, oh, your boyfriend told you it was a superhero movie and all this kind of stuff, and as he's about to savagely murder some people.
Which, right off the bat, this movie lets you know it is rated R. What did you think? What did you think about the R ratings? Like one of the first big superhero movies to be rated R.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's a little cringy and makes you a little uncomfortable, but I think that plays into the character. It's always been, Deadpool's always been billed as the character that kind of pushes the edge and that sort of thing. So I think it kept in step with who Deadpool is. It made it a fun movie in the sense that they just got to do whatever they wanted to do, basically. And, so I don't know that Deadpool's a character you want to introduce to 12-year-olds. So maybe
Which
it's a
is
good
the
thing.
thing, because it was a big deal when this movie came out because people were still taking their kids to see it because they just went, superhero movie. I will take my, like you said, 12-year-old or even younger to go see this. And I remember sitting in the theater. I don't remember if it was this one.
In the first 5 minutes. Yeah.
And just seeing a kid walk in, and I go, oh, no. No.
And they waste no time letting you know that it's rated R for a good reason.
No, exactly.
But
all right, well, let's get into the characters. We've already kind of talked about them a little bit, but of course, our main character, Deadpool himself, Wade Wilson, created in the comics by Rob Liefeld and Fabian, I'm going to butcher his last name, Nziza or Nikaziza or something like that. They do give both of them in the end credits. They do give them credit, and it says special thanks with tongue, and it lists both of them. I just thought that was a fun little bit. So look for that in the end credits. He, of course, is played by Ryan Reynolds, and I mean, has there ever been a better casting for a superhero?
No, and it's kind of crazy because at first, if you hadn't read the comics, you would almost go, yeah, this is just Ryan Reynolds in a superhero suit. What's special about this? He's not really playing it. And then you read him and you're like, oh, okay. So apparently this is where Ryan Reynolds got all of his sense of humor. So
yeah,
it definitely is a good casting.
Well, and there's even in the comics in Cable and Deadpool #2, which came out in 2004. So that was 10 years plus before this movie was probably even written. There is a line where they talk about Deadpool and they say, Deadpool himself says, well, if you looked like Ryan Reynolds crossed with a Shar-Pei. And he's describing himself. So, 2004, this is before X-Men Origins. This is before this movie. Deadpool, the writers of Deadpool even had him compare himself to Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, but it really wasn't a secret that Ryan Reynolds was a big Deadpool fan way back. And so, he was already, 2004, he's already pretty famous. So I think he had already been trying to get the rights to make the movie even way back then, but maybe it wasn't that far back. But I mean, it wouldn't have been a huge shocker for the writers to know that Ryan Reynolds was into Deadpool and throw him a bone and kind of put that in there. But I don't know the background on it.
Yeah, he's so perfectly cast. And I even remember when Origins came out and they were he's playing Wade Wilson. I'm going, oh. I was fine that if he wasn't going to be Deadpool, just the fact of they've planted this seed. And maybe he'll just be Wade Wilson in this one, and then he gets to become Deadpool, because, again, it is Origins, and we'll get to see it later. But then they, again, sewed his mouth shut and did all
But they even threw you a bone at the beginning of the movie. You know, you see Wade be the merc with the mouth as they're a band of mercenaries and everything, and so he's all lipping off to Wolverine and all that stuff. So they really did.
Do you ever shut up? And he says, "Not while I'm awake."
So they almost teased you to the point of it was insulting when they took it away at the end of the movie. But okay, I'll stop. That's not the movie we're reviewing. So
well, but then we get into, so Ryan Reynolds then jumps over the line and goes to DC, and then he plays Green Lantern, which I love that they make fun of in this, as he's, of course, one of my favorite lines, which I remember was even in the trailer, was the, don't make the super suit green or animated. Yeah.
Well, he also, to be fair, he makes fun of the Origins character too. He's got the action figure. Remember, about halfway
and
through
he says something like, "This is my most prized possession," but then he moves it out of the way and picks up the Wham album.
Yep. Wham.
Yeah, this is when they earn the explanation point. Yeah. Which you and I were actually talking about this prior to recording. There's the line that Colossus says to him later that says, "To be a superhero really only takes 4 or 5 moments." And if you do the math, okay, he's played Wade Wilson once. He played Green Lantern. You could actually go back to when he played the little sidekick in Blade Trinity. That's 3, which makes this 4. And it's almost like Colossus is saying 4 or 5. You may need to do another one before it works out. But luckily this one worked out.
Yeah, I did think that was pretty cool.
Yeah. This movie, and we'll talk about this throughout the whole episode, I just know this movie is so true to the character Deadpool, but it is not true to Wade Wilson, because in the comics, Wade Wilson, before he becomes Deadpool, is not the sarcastic, happy-go-lucky guy. Wade Wilson is just a jerk.
Yeah. You don't get that through thread that you do in the movie. It does change him altogether, but I don't know that you could put another comic book movie up that just nails the main character at his like core essence better than this one does.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the movie works so well. They don't lean, and I'm sure, like you were saying, we'll talk more about this too, but they don't lean much on actual comic stories. There's not a run that you can point to that 2 is a different story. They're obviously taking from some comic runs, but the first one, I can't think of one of the series that really lines up to. Yeah. And so, but they took the time to really get the character right. And that's what to me is cool. And yeah, they bend the rules a little bit, and
which you have
you can talk about
taking years of story and fitting it into 2 hours.
And you can talk about the little stuff like, he wasn't made by Weapon X in the movie. It's this other like shady offshoot organization. And Ajax is apparently kind of an amalgam of the 2 characters that create Deadpool in the books. So you get rid of the Dr. Killebrand guy, or Killebrew, what a name, by the way, but he's gone altogether. And so you get this strange amalgam in Ajax, which, I don't know, it kind of works, but for all the little things like that I feel like comic book nerds always pick on with comic movies about that they didn't get it true to the books. Like, it doesn't matter because they just killed it with the character, the sarcasm, the breaking the fourth wall, which, to go back to that, I actually timed it on this watching. I was like, how long is it before he does that? It's like 4 minutes in when he first turns to the camera and lets you know that he's in on the joke, like, and everything. And that's so key to that character.
Yeah.
Can you think of another comic book character that breaks the fourth wall? I'm pretty sure he's the only one.
Yeah, that I can think of. there's been kind of the comedic stuff. You actually go back in the archives. My wife and I, Bethany, just did Josie and the Pussycats. And one of those characters does turn to the camera and kind of give the wink or the nod.
Well, I mean, in the books.
Oh,
not
you're
on
in the
film,
comic books.
but,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Not that I can think of, but I mean, it's so, as you're saying, that is so an aspect of Deadpool.
Right.
That,
he's the only comic book superhero that knows he's in a comic book.
Yeah.
And they riff on that so hard that you get to the point where you have the run that is Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. It's like, it is such a key component to his character, and just 4 minutes into the movie, bam, you get him turned to the camera and start telling you about his life. It's super
that
awesome.
Also going back into just the character itself, the whole point of him being that way in the comic books is because of what happened to him with Weapon X. It drove him insane.
Right.
And so they've even played with the fact of him talking to, breaking the fourth wall is his insanity in view of all the other characters, which they kind of played with in this movie when, I forgot if it was Teenage Negasonic, whatever order it goes in, when her Colossus,
I think it's Colossus.
Yeah, Colossus says, "Who are you talking to?" Or answers them or something. He goes, "I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to them." So that we're his psychosis.
So that would be kind of the one section I would say that they didn't go far enough. And maybe it's just because it would be very difficult because let's be honest, he wasn't a mainstream character, whereas something like Spider-Man, you could say maybe, half of the people who are going to view this have read a Spider-Man comic book and kind of know what's up. I would say that 1/10 of the people that went to see Deadpool had ever seen a Deadpool comic book, much less read one. So maybe it's just too over the line, but he's insane in the comic books.
Yeah.
And he's not. I wouldn't call him insane. He's very sarcastic. He doesn't necessarily do things, the way a rational person would, but he's not absolutely crazy either, like Deadpool is in the comics. So I don't know, but I think they could have taken that portion of it a little further, but that's not enough. It's not a big enough difference that I would say that I dislike what they did with it or anything.
Well, so with that, and we'll get back into the characters in a minute, but I like where this is going. Do you think it would have been over the line to stylize this movie the way they did that Ang Lee did the Hulk, where we actually saw panels and the little yellow boxes?
If you'd have given him some thought bubbles and stuff in some of those places where it could have made for a very interesting, very different movie. I don't know. That could have, I could see a world in which that worked, but I don't know that you still have the affinity for the character that you do by the end of this movie if he's just way crazy. I mean, you get the one scene where he's stabbed in the head and there's some clear problems going on there, but I don't know if that could have been carried through the movie, that he is just insane. So I think they did the right thing, but it's not super true to the comic book, I guess.
Yeah. All right, moving on to, because we'll talk about Deadpool and all the stuff they chose throughout this, but let's go ahead and move on to our next character, which is the love interest, Vanessa, played by Morena Baccarin, or as Bethany and I like to refer to her, the actress we like, but everything she's in gets canceled.
Yeah.
Because, we were fans of Firefly, which she was in and got canceled.
Yeah.
I was a fan of the reboot of V, where she was the queen, and that got canceled. And I mean, she made it out, but she wasn't a continuing character throughout the entire thing. But she was in Gotham, so this isn't, she still stayed in those comic books. She was on the show Gotham as Leslie Tompkins, the medical examiner that worked with the precinct, and she was also the voice of Gideon. I don't know if she still is, but she's the voice of Gideon on The Flash. So she's got her hand in the comics there. Now, the character is from the comics. She first appeared in the New Mutants 98, which if you paid attention to earlier was also the debut of Deadpool.
Mm-hmm.
However, you didn't know she was in it because in the comics, Vanessa is a character called Copycat.
Yeah. Which is obviously a big difference from the movie because she's not a mutant.
Yeah, in the comic book, she is a mutant, and she doesn't appear as Vanessa until X-Force 19 in February of 93. But yeah, not only is she not a mutant that we know of, we don't know if they're going to play with that later in maybe another movie, but she's also not blue because she's blue in the comic books.
Right. Yeah. I thought it was interesting that they still used the character Vanessa and then didn't at all make her a mutant. That in and of itself is its own, subtopic, I guess you'd say, about the movie, the way that they interact with what is a mutant and what isn't, because in the books, Deadpool is not considered a mutant. He gains his powers, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a minute anyways, but he gains his powers because he's been given mutant abilities directly from Wolverine, which is, of course, why he has Wolverine-like abilities. So, and they don't do that in this. He's, they explain it as that he has latent mutant powers that they use a series of drugs and stress to manifest, that he's always had, apparently. So they kind of make Deadpool a mutant in that sense. So that's not strictly comic book, but it would have been a little campy if they had used Wolverine for this, with it being a different, in the same universe apparently, but totally different property.
Yeah, which they make a reference to. Apparently, the studio didn't have any money for another X-Man.
Why do I only see two of you?
Yeah. So our next character, also from the comics, is Weasel, who in the comics is also named Jack Hammer, but I don't think they ever refer to him by that name in this movie. Played by T.J. Miller. The character debuted in the comics in Cable number 3 back in July of 1993. This is the closest thing Deadpool has to a sidekick in the comics. He's not a superhero, superpowers, or anything like that. He just provides weapons for Deadpool, is about all he does in the comics, and it's just someone for Deadpool to talk to. I don't know why they didn't do more of that with T.J. Miller, because they introduced the cab driver, who's not from the comics. Yeah. I don't know, but T.J. Miller, of course, is also his version of Weasel acts as the bartender for the Hell House, which he does not do in the comics. In the comics, that's a guy named Patch. Right. So kind of like you mentioned earlier about Ajax being a mashup of a couple of characters, they seem to do the same thing here with Weasel.
Yeah, I like this character though, and again, kind of like with Ryan Reynolds, it's more or less just T.J. Miller being T.J. Miller. Oh, yeah. There was no method acting involved in this. He didn't have to stray far from his normal personality. They gave you that one weird little little vignette when they're packing all the guns into the bag to kind of, I guess, nod at Weasel in the comic books a little bit, but yeah, they don't give him much in the way of what he is in the comics. He sort of kind of seems like he's the guy who books these little mercenary missions for this group of dudes, but they don't even outright tell you that. He just kind of owns where they hang out, apparently.
Yeah, but again, that's Patch in the comic. Patch is the one that deals out the jobs for the mercenaries. And
I do like how he plays him, though. That scene where I would go with you, but I don't want to.
No, I would absolutely, especially the scene when he returns after he's been disfigured.
Oh, dude!
And you look like an old avocado mated with a much older avocado. I would love to just see a run of all, because those lines were ad-libbed. Just a
there
run,
were 15 more of them.
Of all the different things that T.J. Miller and Ryan Reynolds said to each other filming that scene.
even just how he says haunting when you are haunting. It makes me laugh so hard. It's such a good delivery.
All right, so moving on, we do have a couple of X-Men in the movie. First off is Colossus, who is, I wanted to point out, he's voiced by Stefan Kapikic. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his last name, which those of you who are fans of Better Call Saul know him as Casper. And it looks like Chad was actually surprised by that.
Did not know that.
So yeah, the voice, he is the voice, but the motion capture was actually performed by a guy named Craig LaSalle, who, based on my research, this is the only thing that guy's ever done.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe some kind of martial artist or something, so they tapped him for it. But
so going into the same thing we were talking about earlier about, does this exist in the same universe as the X-Men movies and all? You question that with Colossus, because this is a different Colossus than we saw in the X-Men movies of the early 2000s.
Yeah, but they even reference the house blowing up thing, and you know, and with Colossus's line of "house blowing up give you character," you know. But he's, so I don't know. He's obviously a very different incarnation of
the X-Men and the X-Men trilogy, if whatever you want to call it, from the early 2000s. I do believe he wasn't Russian, or at least he never spoke with a Russian accent the few times he did speak. And of course, he wasn't as big.
Right.
You know, even if you could say, well, it's been a few years, he was not that big. Yeah. So we got the Colossus. I do like this Colossus. I'm not gonna deny that. I really like the Colossus.
I have a bizarre special place in my heart for Colossus. I loved that character for some reason when I was circa about 14 years old.
X-Men the animated series.
Yeah. Well, but even before I got into that, just the comic books, I liked that character a lot. And I'm not 100% sure why. I guess just being steel-plated appealed to me at that age or something. Yeah. But yeah, and I do think that this movie incarnation is a pretty good one. I mean, obviously they don't give you any backstory on anybody but Deadpool, so they didn't have to deal with anything of that nature, any kind of origin story or who he is. But they nail it in the sense of he is a guy who runs on the idea of honor and doing the right thing and that sort of thing,
which is straight from the comics. So that was great.
Yeah.
All right, the other X-Men we get is a complete opposite of all of this, is nothing like the comic book character, and that's Negasonic Teenage Warhead, played by Brianna Hildbrand. That character first appeared in New X-Men number 115, just a few years before in August 2001. However, she is completely different in the comics.
This one was really interesting to me. I mean, you only see her use any kind of powers at the end of the movie, basically.
It's Cannonball's power. She's just a female cannonball.
That seems to be somewhat atomically powered, so you get the nuclear portion, maybe? Yeah. I don't know. But anyways, they got the teenage part right. That's about it.
Well, and that's the thing. I will admit, if you didn't know the character from the comics at all, the name Negasonic Teenage Warhead, and then seeing her do again what is really Cannonball's power, that makes sense. Right. The character in the comic book, that name doesn't make any sense to her,
right? Because
she's like this small, frail, emo-looking chick who is a telepath, can see the future, and she can, I guess, reality warp, create things out of nothing. It's a completely different character.
So back to the alternate X-Men universe. I'm totally shooting off the hip on this one, but isn't she in Days of Future Past in the future? Isn't she one of the characters?
No, I don't think she is.
No, I think you're right. I just think her powers are really close to... I'm trying to remember the character that they do use to warp reality and then jump.
Oh,
every time they get killed. Anyways, sorry, off on a tangent there. I think that I think mainly her role in the movie is clearly just to be the foil of some jokes for Ryan Reynolds to tell. Because I mean, you can only beat up on Colossus for so much joke wise, and it's just him being a bully basically. Whereas he has this kind of fun interplay with this teenage girl, sort of making fun of her and getting her to come over to his side, I guess. And it works. But I agree with you. It actually makes more. The name makes more sense for the movie character for once.
Yeah, I looked it up while you were talking. Blink is the character.
Yes. Yeah.
So moving on, we'll get into some of our. We'll get into the next character that's walks a thin line between how close she's based off of the comic, and that's Blind Owl.
Yeah.
So Blind Owl didn't appear until Deadpool got his own comic in January of 1997, and in the comic, she appears to be just his roommate, as this one does, although the comic later kind of reveals that she's actually being held prisoner by Deadpool.
Right.
And so it was
because he is insane.
Yeah. And so it's kind of the same thing in this movie. You're like, is she...
Well, the joke's about that she doesn't pay rent, apparently. Her job is to build IKEA furniture for him, Poorly. So you do kind of get some of that thread from the comics, but her introduction is awesome, though. The fact that she just tells him to use seltzer water to get blood out of his uniform or wear red, idiot,
Yeah. But they do play off of the character in the movie is a friend, even almost like a mother-like figure for him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's a fun little side character, if you will.
Yeah.
Now we got our villains. And we were talking about Ajax earlier, so we'll go ahead and continue talking about him. Ajax, also known as Francis, first appeared in Deadpool number 14, just really a few years before, in March 2011. In this movie, he's played by Ed Skrein. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. And we talked about earlier...
jacked for this role, by the way.
Yeah. We talked about earlier, he's kind of a combination of the character Ajax, who is from the comics, and Dr. Killebrew. Because in the comics, Killebrew's the doctor who's behind the experiments for the Project X, the Weapon X. And Ajax is just kind of his pawn, his mercenary, his own personal mercenary. When any of the subjects get out of hand, it's Ajax's job to recapture them, or, as was the case for Deadpool in the comics, it was to kill them.
Right.
And,
which is also confusing to me, because so they sort of moved Ajax into this Dr. Killebrew role. Not sort of. They moved him into the Dr. Killebrew role, but they leave him with his powers and that sort of thing. But they also kind of bring Angel in as basically what Ajax was in the comic book.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit confusing. This is probably the one place where I don't think, apart from the comic book, where I don't think the movie works, because you don't have... There's really no good reason for this dude to be who he is, because apparently he went through the program. He tells Wade that he got powers through this too. What kind of psycho then turns around and does it to other people? Like, if this program is that bad, like, yeah, okay, whatever. And he just happened to have the skill set needed to do this high level genetics work.
Yeah, that's my thing about the character is, you're going, I don't see this guy as any type of genetic physicist or whatever he's supposed to be.
He's not an MIT grad or something. Yeah. So that, I mean, really a small point in the movie, but that's probably the only thing that I would say I have a problem with this movie is I don't at all understand why he's doing what he's doing. Apparently it's just because he's a sadist and for some money. Like, that's kind of all we get out of it, but you don't really need it to be any more than that either, though. So.
Yeah, because that's the other thing. I don't have the character written down. I don't know if I can't remember if he's ever really named. But the Men in Black dude that confronts Wade.
Agent Smith. Yeah.
He just calls him Agent Smith, which I'm just looking at him going, no, you're that alien from Galaxy Quest. That's all I know.
Yeah.
But we never know, like, who's he working for? Like,
right.
Does he work for Ajax, or is Ajax being funded by some...
Right.
Yeah, and they keep that very vague.
You don't really...
I didn't have a problem, though, with Ajax having powers and being the doctor, because then that gave us the two big battles at the end. You got to get through the henchman, which was Angel, before you get to the boss, which was Ajax, and he had to be able to fight Ajax. So I didn't have a problem with that, but I agree with what you said. So moving on to the henchman, if you will, or henchwoman, Angel, which is actually Angel Dust, is the character played by Gina Carano. In the comics, she's one of the Morlocks, which is the like independent band of mutants that hide in the subway tunnels because many of them their mutation caused them not to be able to want to be seen by the public. So she's one of the Morlocks. The thing is, there's not a lot about her in the comics, and I tried to do a little research, and I couldn't really find much of anything. I do know that she doesn't do an awful lot, so I'm not sure how close her powers are. But in the comics, she loses all of her powers on M-Day.
Yeah.
So...
Well, I almost wonder if the reason they call her Angel and not Angel Dust is because there's very little correlation here. Granted, they don't exactly flesh out the character in the movie. They spend very, very little time talking about her at all. But she apparently was also part of the program, and her powers manifest as super strength. When Ajax tells you that, you just kind of assume it's because she went through the same underground Weapon X that they're running now. So again, what kind of psychopath just turns around to do this to other people? But she does seem to be pretty crazy, so maybe that works out. But I mean, she barely talks in the entire film.
And this was even in my rewatch of it. Part of me just kind of wished that she never spoke.
Yeah. Yeah, just a totally silent character.
Now, there's one moment I do love when Colossus knocks her down, and when he goes to get her, he realizes she's popped out of her top, and she goes, "Oh, well, thank you, that's so sweet," and then goes right back. I did love that moment. Yeah, but part of me was like, I almost kind of wish she never spoke.
Yeah, I mean, really, you only need her as a device for two things. You need her to be the henchman at the end that you were already talking about, and you need her to be there for Wade to get the match from during his escape from I keep calling it Weapon X program. I really don't think they ever called it that in the movie. I'm just don't have another term to use to call it, but the program, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, they called it the workshop.
Oh, yeah. In his escape from the workshop, you do need that moment where he makes the henchman mad and gets the matchstick from her. So there's that. But pretty forgettable character other than that. I mean, I think it was cast fairly well. She's clearly a formidable person, and it works as a believable role. I don't know if this was this her first acting gig?
No, Haywire.
I mean, clearly, clearly we've seen her in The Mandalorian now, and she has grown leaps and bounds. But
yeah, and even though I'm not a huge fan of them and haven't seen most of them, I think she's also in some of the Fast and the Furious movies.
Oh, okay.
I even remember when she was thinking about getting into acting, because she is an MMA fighter, was how she started. Right. And around that time of the movie Haywire, it was kind of to feature her and what she could do. And I remember there was talk, just a hint, of that she was probably going to be Wonder Woman. But
oh, no, I don't remember that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, because, and I don't want to say anything against her. I have nothing against her. You just talked about how she's currently a Mandalorian. I love her in The Mandalorian. But there was a lot of talk about, if you go back and watch Haywire, or, she's put on some pounds. It works for her as a fighter, but yeah. All right, one more character here. Got to talk about it if you're a fan of Deadpool. The little nod of Hydra Bob.
Yeah. Bob, Agent of Hydra.
Yeah.
I remember this right after the movie came out because it's such a good nod because you clearly get that these guys love these comic books because for those of you who aren't big Deadpool fans in the comics, he is obsessed with Captain America. Like it's pretty hilarious how obsessed he is with Captain America, and so therefore, of course, he fights Hydra from time to time, even as part of the Avengers every now and then, all this kind of stuff, and so you get a character who they can't really put in this movie because he's not a Fox property
because
at all.
Hydra's in the main MCU, but there's nothing against just naming a henchman Bob.
Bob, yeah, who they apparently really had a good time at that Jacksonville TGI Fridays. So,
Yeah, I don't know where they're going to go with it if he'll ever appear in another movie. Because he's just played he's just a stuntman in this one. Rob Hader that plays him is just a stuntman. I'm sure he could pull off some acting stuff. Many stuntmen have done it before. But yeah, if you're interested in Bob, Agent of Hydra, he did first show up in the comics in Cable and Deadpool number 38 in May of 2007. And he's one of those characters that if you are a Deadpool fan, you're aware of Bob.
Yeah. He's so inept. It's so funny. He's like the worst sidekick ever. And oh man, Bob's great.
All right. So
it was a really cool wink. I was super glad that Marvel didn't get their feathers in a ruffle over it, which, I mean, let's be honest, it's not like Marvel didn't make money off of this. So, it works in their favor too, if we're being totally honest about it. But it was cool that they kind of did a, you got us sort of thing. And so that was a really cool part of it as well.
Well, I mean, you say that. The final battle is clearly a helicarrier. It's a broken down helicarrier.
Right, because this did come out right after Civil War. So, and I love how they don't acknowledge it at all.
No.
At all. Like, this isn't weird that they just happen to be at this giant helicarrier that is, being dismantled after some horrible battle. So it's such a great nod.
And now it's time for the anchor commercial. All right, so let's get into the moving panels. We've kind of hit a lot of this before. We've talked about him breaking the fourth wall, which is straight from the comic books, one of the best aspects of the character. Not an awful lot I could find, as Chad has also said, that comes straight from the comics. Really, I mean, there's Wade and Vanessa's relationship, which comes from a comic called Deadpool, The Circle Chase from October of 1993, but it is literally one page.
Yeah, and is the driving force of the entire movie. So
it's one page in which we get it's a flashback scene in which you see where Wade, because this is before he was Deadpool, he's leaving, and it's a girl named Vanessa. It's apparently a really young girl named Vanessa, because he does say you're just a kid in one of the panels, although he does also acknowledge the fact that she was a prostitute, which, they kind of tied in with the character in the movie.
Right.
But that's it. It's one page. So that was it. And I think it was one of those things where they named that character Vanessa, and I don't know if their intention was that it was the same character that Copycat would be, or if it just
they used the name.
They just happened to use the same name. So
yeah, I don't know. I was thinking the same thing. It was an interesting choice altogether, in the sense of Wade Wilson has dated or had relationships with an amazing number of other characters throughout the Marvel universe. So, including Lady Death, just a whole thing. So he's been with Black Widow, which obviously wouldn't have worked, considering they don't want to acknowledge the Fox properties at this time and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it was same thing with Angel. I kind of wonder if they didn't just use it because it was a name from the comic book, and they really loosely just take this backstory to kind of get to that. Because I mean, obviously they didn't give her any sort of mutant powers. I say that, but she did survive a fall in a glass tube from a couple 100 feet up. So maybe there's some some mutant. I love how she's not secured to anything, but that's apparently supposed to protect her. Like she wouldn't crush her skull on this cylinder she's captured in when she hit
I didn't
the
quite
ground.
understand that either. It's like, what are we gonna do now? And it's like, well, I have an idea, but you're not gonna like it. And I'm going, of course she's not gonna like it because that doesn't save her at all.
But yeah. So yeah, to me, it was just another one of the characters who they really loosely took from the books. They do take the majority of his origin story from a run. And
it was Deadpool and Death from June of 1998.
Yeah.
That was what they that version of his origin is what they matched.
You do have the cancer, all of that stuff. And that apparently has kind of always been part of his thing. When I was mentioning earlier that he does break the fourth wall to tell you crazy Joker-like varying origins, it's mostly about his childhood. You don't really know much about Wade Wilson before just a very few years before he becomes Deadpool. So that's always been kind of part of it, but that was pretty much straight from the books, except for they don't use Wolverine's DNA to change him. It's not in Canada, but that was they do actually reference the town that the character is from in the comic books. He mentions during the bridge fight scene that he's from Regina, Saskatchewan, and that's actually true to the books as well.
I didn't catch that.
And it's kind of. I think it's also a fun nod because obviously Ryan Reynolds is also Canadian. Mm-hmm. You have to kind of wonder if that's one of the reasons that it's one of his favorite characters, but who knows?
Yeah. No, like you said, a lot of it matches the Deadpool and Death comic from '98, which also includes when he goes through the Weapon X and ends up in Department K, which is what the workshop, is in the movie, kind of where the failures would go from Weapon X. He meets a guy who, at the time in the comics, is known as the Attendant. And the Attendant later you find out his name's Francis, and he becomes Ajax. That whole making fun of Ajax and as the Attendant, whatever, that comes from that same storyline as well. It's sad to say this, but since we were just, as you were talking and I was thinking about it, the whole Weapon X thing, that's really the one thing that the X-Men Origins Wolverine movie actually got right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the iconic scene of him popping out of the tank and all that stuff, that was like ripped straight from the comic books.
Yeah. But other than that, it's a horrible movie.
I mean, do you think there's a way? I mean, obviously it would be difficult considering that they had botched Deadpool in the making of that movie, but do you think that there's a way that they could have referenced it as Weapon X and this still been a believable movie, or do you think that kind of rips you out of that reality and makes you go, oh man, think about Origins again?
Yeah, that was my thing. I think this movie needed to be, it kind of, as it does, kind of exist in its own universe. Although it does mess with, it's just about every X-Men movie Fox has used with their license. There's no continuity at all to any of it.
Yeah.
And so could they? Sure. But I think it would have been too much for this movie. I think just keep Deadpool his own thing and just have this small little X-Men reference, but just kind of keep him his own thing. Don't give him the big connection. Although he does it himself when he says, what did I have to do to get this movie, to get my own movie? Keep myself family friendly as I'm saying that line.
Rhymes with Wolverine.
Yeah. So, But yeah, so again, you wonder why they didn't use the Weapon X. Was it to keep it separate? Because clearly it wasn't a property thing, because Fox owned.
Right. It's Fox.
Yeah, Fox owned it. They could have said it. They used X-Men. They used the mansion and all that. So I don't know. I like it keeping it its own separate thing, which hopefully now, I know there's been talks of, will Kevin Feige bring Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool into the MCU, and we'll just have to wait and see. But the fact that they kept him separate gives kind of Kevin Feige that ability.
Dude, so here's where as a Deadpool fan, I get super excited, because it seems like the MCU is moving into doing Secret Wars. You know, with the whole cosmic thing and that stuff. If you've never read or seen Deadpool's Secret Wars, dude, it's one of the best comic runs there is. Like, you had Secret Wars, which in the comic book world was a giant run. It was a huge deal that tied a ton of books together all of a sudden. And then they totally parodied it with Deadpool having his own run that was a joke on that. And it's pretty epic. It's an awesome run of comic books. But
which, when you just said the parody thing, I don't know why I didn't bring this up in the segment of the characters. For people who don't know, Deadpool is a parody of a DC character.
Yep.
So DC has a character named Deathstroke, and he's Deadpool, but even his real name, the character in DC, is Slade Wilson, and he's Wade Wilson. And I mean, even their costumes resemble. So yeah, if you didn't know that, I know I mentioned it in my open, but yeah, take a look. Deathstroke, Deadpool. Deadpool is a parody of that character.
It's not even a secret. Rob Liefeld has, on the record, said that's what he was doing, and of course it becomes its own entity. You never see, for one, Deathstroke never. I won't say never. I think he has recently, but I'm not as up on DC stuff. He's pretty classic villain. He's not an anti-hero, which Wade Wilson was at first. He was introduced to be a throwaway villain that was supposed to make fun of the Slade Wilson character. But Rob Liefeld has, who, if you don't know who that is, you should. He's a pretty pivotal dude in 90s comic books, great writer. He has said that he was a huge Teen Titans fan, and that's where he brought the whole thing from. And when you look at him, like Laramy was saying, swords, outfits, very, very similar. They're mercenaries, the whole thing. And then he turns it on his head by making him this hugely sarcastic, insane person, which Slade Wilson is a very serious individual. So
there were things that I found that were straight from the comic. There is a scene that is almost shot for shot, bubble for bubble, straight out of the comic. Are you aware of what scene this is, Chad?
No, not off the top of my head.
It's the pizza guy scene.
Nice.
The pizza guy scene is from Deadpool number 10 in 2008. It is the exact same bit where the pizza guy shows up to this guy's apartment. The guy has no clue what's going on. The what's on the pizza is the exact same, and then Deadpool showing up. Although it is Deadpool in the comic, it's not Wade.
Not Wade Wilson.
Yeah, it's Deadpool, and the difference is also at the end of the scene in the comic, he kills the pizza guy instead of just threatening him and letting him go.
That's awesome. That's one of my favorite lines. What's the of course, now that I'm trying to say it, what is it? Oh, pineapple and olives, sweet and salty.
Yeah. But other things that are kind of hidden, and I don't know how much of this is the writers or how much of this, honestly, is Ryan Reynolds being such a big fan.
Yeah.
In that scene, Ryan Reynolds, Wade Wilson, whatever you want to say, is wearing a B. Arthur shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're familiar, Deadpool in the comics has clearly made it known he is a huge fan of B. Arthur. Not only that, but in the comics, Deadpool one time gets his own like spaceship, not spaceship, but like a flying ship, and he calls it the B. Arthur.
Yeah.
There's also in the apartment in one shot, we get a quick glimpse of a red like Vespa scooter in the apartment, which is something that Deadpool has been seen in the comics, driving around on.
I did not catch that. I should have. I did not catch that.
And did you see this? Of course, isn't from the comics. Did you see that there's like just a bunch of like Deadpool figurines all around the house?
Yeah, which is but that's very on brand.
Oh yeah.
In the comics, there's a running joke that he's the merc with the merch as well. So he's always selling his own stuff. I really hope he gets to play around now that he's in the greater realm of Disney properties and everything. But to see him and Captain America potentially, some of the runs where he and Spider-Man are together are amazing. Like
which they played a nod to in the animation during the end credits. They actually had him drop down with a spider web.
Right. So. A lot of people don't know that in the books he gets the Venom symbiote before it goes to Spider-Man. So a lot of hardcore Spider-Man fans argued that Venom is insane because he had bonded with Wade Wilson before he goes to Peter Parker. So stuff like that. There's I mean, it's obviously you've got years and years and years of comic books to play with, but he's got a lot of cool storylines. Killing dead zombie presidents, I mean, that clearly could be worked in.
Yeah. Of course, I had to save this for last in terms of things I wanted to connect with the comic book. There is the great line when he gets out of the cab where he says, "Time to make the chimichangas."
Yep.
And of course, the chimichanga reference. Anyone fan of Deadpool? I mean, that is all over Deadpool comics.
His catchphrase. Yeah. How great is that character, though? The cab driver.
Which, again, not from the comics. Completely.
Right. But if I had to name a favorite scene in the entire movie, it's when he's trying to tell him, with Colossus listening, he's saying, "Don't kill."
He's got the dude in the trunk.
His cousin in the trunk.
Yeah.
And under his breath, he's, "Kill him." I stinking love that scene so much. It's awesome.
And then I love that he calls him Mr. Poole throughout the... Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so unless there's something else you want to talk about the movie, I think we're ready to move on to our final decision here.
I think we've covered it pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into our final decision. Of course, on Moving Panels, we treat it the way we would treat a comic. We either bag it, stack it, or trade it. And, I mean, come on. We know where we're going with this one. But go ahead, Chad. Give your decision and why.
Oh, man. So, definitely a bag it for me. This movie, I think you can make the argument that it changed a ton of stuff in comic book films altogether. For one, it's clearly the first really adult film. It is not, as we discussed earlier, meant for 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
So you had that portion of it, just how it kind of moved the needle on what a comic book movie could be. But I think that even that is eerily similar to the character from the comic books, because you had this run in the 90s where comic books just exploded. It was a huge deal, but it was all based on the backs of 50-year-old characters, and Deadpool was something very, very different. And he was the guy that did wink at you both literally and figuratively through the page, kind of thing. So they captured that so well in this movie, and I feel like it was just like Deadpool coming up in the books in the early 90s. During a boom in comic books. Similarly, we're in the middle of a boom of comic book movies, and he shows up and is able to do the same thing, kind of give you a little bit of levity. You can laugh with the character, you're in on the joke with it, all of that sort of stuff. So I don't think it's such a timely movie in that sense. it honors the character as good or better than any comic book movie that I think has ever been made. So it's definitely in my favorites, and it's just a laugh a minute. It's ridiculously funny. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could say it any better than you. It's definitely a baggage for me, as you said. It's about as perfect of a comic book movie as you could make. I mean, yes, it doesn't follow any storylines out of the comics, but it is true to the character, which is what I'm sure I'm speaking for you, Chad, but feel free to speak up, is what we want as comic book characters. We don't care what the story is. We want our characters on the big screen and on television. So as long as we get those characters, you can do whatever story you want.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's fun when they do nod to a story you like or give you the little bit of a wink of, we give you a little bit of credit. You know the work. You've read the books kind of thing. And that's a lot of fun, but man, they killed it on nailing who Deadpool the character is. So hats off to Ryan Reynolds and that whole crew of people that put that together. And it's just amazing that Fox let them even redeem that after the critical and box office failure that Origins wound up being and how panned it was. So it's kind of an amazing movie that it even got made.
Well, and even trusting Ryan Reynolds to, star in it when the last time he starred in a movie, it was Green Lantern. So,
oh, man. Yeah, no doubt.
No, there's definitely all of that. But also going to a point you made about bagging it, the fact that they were willing to make this rated R, which completely changed the game. You and I just, a few weeks ago talked about the movie Joker.
Oh, yeah.
But then there's also going even to Fox.
Logan.
Would we have gotten Logan if this movie had not been successful as a rated R movie?
I don't think so. I maybe you would have gotten an Old Man Logan movie, but I don't think it would have been the movie we got.
No, I agree. Yeah, this was definitely a game changer. Again, it's going to be interesting now that Disney has acquired Fox and now technically re-owns this character. Kevin Feige with Marvel cannot ignore the like you said, the merc with the merch. You can't ignore this character. This is not going to be a character that you can change in order to bring him into the MCU. You can't get a different actor. It's got to be Ryan Reynolds. And you can't do if you're going to do another Deadpool movie, which at the time of this recording, as we've already talked about, Deadpool 2 has already come out. But if they ever wanted to do another Deadpool movie, it's going to have to be rated R. You can't now tone it down. And I know they made fun of that with the Deadpool 2, and they did Once Upon a Deadpool.
Which was awesome.
Yeah.
So something we didn't point out, though, this was the highest grossing rated R movie of all time.
Until Joker.
Yeah. I mean, you can't ignore that. So with people who kind of cynically say that there has to be another Black Panther movie because it made so much money, you could make the same argument with Deadpool. I mean, it is a big box office property and tons of merch involved with it and everything. So I would love to see it. Clearly I'm a fan. I mean, if you've listened this far, this is not a shocker, but I would love to see him in the MCU.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Chad, any last words? Anything you want to share?
No, just thanks for having me again. I've really enjoyed the few of these that I've gotten to do. Thanks, Laramy.
I always enjoy it and always ready to have you back. So thank you very much, Chad. All right, everybody. Again, please rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends. Let's build this show up and get it out there. But for the time being, on behalf of my host, Chad Smith, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.